8 or so college counselors that we have in the Center for College Planning at NEAF Network. And our job is really to kind of help your college counselors to do what they do best. So our portion of it is typically the financial aid piece, although we do talk college admissions as well. But this is one piece that, that sometimes your school counselors have enough to do. And this is a piece that we can kind of help you out with. Everything that we do is free of charge. So we definitely hope you'll take advantage of that. There's not a lot, as I'm sure you're all learning right now, that is free in this college process. So certainly take advantage of those places that are free. So one of the things, just to let you know real quick before we do get started, is that this presentation, so all of the slides are all available up on our website, and there's also a lot of other information that you can certainly get there, including our Financial Aid Insider, which is kind of our 20-some page booklet all about financial aid. So that is available up on our website as well. So don't feel like you have to take notes or take screenshots or whatever it may be at this hour of the evening, for sure. So that is available. And then one more thing before we jump into the meat of the presentation. We have a program called Destination College. It's for high school juniors. It's a day filled with workshops, and we're typically on a college campus. Usually we go back and forth between a college campus in the northern part of the state and then one in the southern part of the state the next year, kind of back and forth. This year we were slated to be at the beautiful campus of St. Anselm College when COVID hit. So unfortunately, we weren't able to be with all of our students, our juniors, high school juniors and their families in person, but we were able to kind of switch gears pretty quickly and record some of the live webinars or some of the live presentations that we would have had as webinars. So on our YouTube channel, you can view all of those webinars. Everything you see up there is part of that program. So if there are certain things you're looking for, if you're looking at nursing as a career, or if you want to hear from some admission directors from around the state, their perspective of the admission process, certainly jump onto that channel and you can view those webinars as well. All right, so now let's talk some financial aid as we move through the presentation. So one of the first things that I think is really important to understand is that there really are two types of financial aid, and you may see one or the other, or more likely both, as part of your student's financial aid award. So the first type that you can see up there on the screen right now is called gift aid. And gift aid is free money. It's money that your student or you don't have to pay back when the student graduates from college. And typically you're going to see either the word scholarship or the word grant on a financial aid award. Scholarships are usually merit-based, so it's based on something that your student has done well. Most often, that's going to be academics, so their grades, the classes that they've taken, the rigor, and potentially test scores, although this year, I'm sure you've all talked about this quite often, but this year, certainly with the pandemic, most colleges have gone test optional, so really they're going to be focusing more on that high school transcript this year. But again, academics is probably the heaviest category that we're going to see merit aid for students. But some of our talented students, whether that's, it's an artistic talent that they have performing arts, they're a singer, a dancer, they play music, whatever it may be, they may have an interview as part of, or an audition as part of their application process. And based on that audition, they may also be receiving some merit-based scholarship. Some of our students are great athletes and they've been recruited by some of the Division I or NCAA Division I or Division II schools, and they may receive some athletic scholarship as part of their award from the college. Less likely, we do see that some of the schools are looking at community service or things like leadership in order to give out some of those merit-based scholarships. So whenever we see that word scholarship, that's always a great thing as part of the financial aid award. The word grant typically means that that money is coming to a student based on need, and it's based on the numbers that are presented on one or two financial aid forms that college is going to require, and we're going to talk about both of those tonight. But based on the family's finances, student may qualify for grant money, and again, that's free money that the student doesn't need to be paying back when they graduate from school. So gift aid is the really good stuff. The other part that every student is going to see to some extent is self-help aid. So our students are going to be offered a federal student loan. It is every student is going to receive this as part of their financial aid as long as they file a FAFSA form. They're going to be able to borrow money in their own name. So it's not going to be in the parents' names. The bill is not coming to mom and dad. This is money that the students can borrow without a cosigner, without credit. They're able to borrow on this federal student loan. So when our students are freshmen, they can borrow $5,500. Then when they're sophomores, they can borrow $6,500. And then for their junior and their senior years, they can borrow $7,500. If your student had an additional undergraduate year, they were part of a 5-year undergrad program, or maybe they couldn't get all of their coursework done in those 4 years, they could also borrow $7,500 for that 5th year. So the federal student loans are going to be part of a financial aid award. And sometimes people don't think of that as really being financial aid, but certainly with the low interest rates and the ability for a student to borrow without an income or without a credit history, it is certainly helping to get them to the colleges. Some of our students may also see what's called work study. And this is something where on the financial aid award, they're going to see the word work study. It's probably going to say federal work study, and then a certain dollar amount. And it might be $2,500 or it might be $1,500, but there's going to be a particular dollar amount attached to that work study. That is not money that comes off of the bill when you receive that. That's money that the student has to go to campus. They need to find a job. They need to work a certain number of hours per week, and they can earn up to whatever that amount is on their award. So again, it's something that, again, doesn't come off the bill. It's something that we can't plan on in terms of them necessarily getting that full amount, but they have to go, they have to get the job, and they have to earn that money. A lot of families will use that as spending money on the campus, maybe for books, for getting pizza with their buddies on a Friday night, whatever it may be. But that money typically ends up being spending money because they'll get a paycheck every other week on campus. So again, 2 types of financial aid that students might encounter. How that kind of plays into things prior to applying for financial aid or in the admission process, there are some things that you do want to think about in terms of financial aid when you're putting together the list of colleges. And one of those things is that type of aid that is offered at the school. Not every college offers both of those types of aid. So they may not offer, merit-based aid. They may not offer need-based aid. They may do both, but they may choose one or the other. So each college has their own pool of money to offer to students. And that they can choose how they do that. So again, they may offer that in one way or another way or both ways. And it's important to understand that, because if you're counting on merit-based financial aid because your student has done really well academically and the college doesn't offer money that way, your student can be the valedictorian and they're not going to receive merit-based financial aid from that particular institution. So understanding how the colleges are offering that money is going to help you to put together a really strong list of colleges that will also help you financially to get your student to where they want to be. You can see up on the screen there, kind of rimmed in hot pink, one of the colors of the Center for College Planning, so it hurts your eyes a little. But that little box there shows you a screenshot of one of our local colleges. It's actually St. Anselm College, and you can see that on their website, they actually put right up there, we have this Chancellor's Honor Scholarship that students can get up to $25,000. We also have these other merit scholarships, and they really list them out, and you can understand what they're offering. That's one way to know how a college is offering their money. So this school obviously has merit-based aid that they're offering students. They do also have need-based aid at St. Anselm College, but you can see that they definitely have that merit-based aid. So it's important to understand that. Work with your college counselors. They have a great track record of understanding what these schools are doing, what students with the same type of academic profile that your student has might be getting in terms of aid from some of these schools. So, making sure you're keeping in touch with them as you're putting that list together is going to be really helpful. The other thing up there about this college search process is having that money talk early on in the process. So that money talk is really that conversation between parents or guardians and students in terms of what your expectations are in terms of who's going to be paying for what. Are you able as a family to contribute this much and you're expecting your student to contribute that much? If we're going to borrow money, is that going to be in mom and dad's name, or is that going to be in the student's name? So talking about those things before the student has been admitted to that wonderful, amazing dream college of theirs, and they didn't come through with quite enough money, it's easier to talk to them prior to that so that they have an understanding of, you know, what you can and can't afford in terms of colleges, rather than after they've been accepted to all those schools. So having that talk early is going to be really helpful in putting together that list of schools. And then another thing to consider is that you want to really look at the net price of the college and not just the sticker price of the college. The sticker price is what you're seeing up on their website. So it's tuition, room and board. Sometimes they include their fees in that price, sometimes they don't. But in either case, you're likely not going to pay that sticker price at a particular institution. You're going to pay a net price, and the net price is really that price once they put into place that merit-based and that need-based aid. So what are you really going to be paying at these colleges? Because some schools may cost an awful lot of money, but they're going to come through with so much financial aid that that net price is going to put you right where you kind of want to be, whereas other schools may not have as high a sticker price to begin with, but their net price doesn't change too far from that sticker price. So looking at things like net price calculators can really help you to determine what that is going to look like. Every college has a net price calculator on their financial aid page. Sometimes you have to kind of search for it. I usually will just put it up into the search box in the, you know, on the page. If I can't find it quickly, just put in net price calculator and it'll come up for you. But every college is required to have one. And they can really, they break down what a student might be able to receive in aid from that particular institution. It's not 100% necessarily, because it's only as accurate as the numbers we're putting in and whether they've updated their numbers for the upcoming school year, but it's a great way to at least have some sense of what that school may be able to offer a student like yours. And some of the colleges have really sophisticated net price calculators where they also allow you to put in things like, I have this many honors courses or this many AP courses, and they might calculate merit-based aid as well. So it can be a really great tool, and especially for those families that kind of want to get started earlier in the process. So take a peek at some of those. All right,
so Karen, could we just check, or were there any questions? I saw that you guys are having difficulty unmuting yourselves. So feel free, if you do have any questions, you know, feel free to ask, or if you want to put them in the chat, whichever works best for you. I just want to make sure everyone can unmute themselves and ask questions.
Absolutely, and stop me every now and then too, because I tend to get going and I want to make sure everybody gets the information and gets to relax for the night. So tell me, stop, we have some questions. We can do that. Feel free to jump in or send those in the chat for sure. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, and I'm going to talk about applying for financial aid. And when you are applying, it's possible that you're going to see two financial aid forms. The first one that you see up there on your screen is called the FAFSA form, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. I kind of call this the ticket to ride. This is the form that anyone fills out if they're looking for financial aid, because every college is going to be asking for this form. So whether it's a 2-year school or a 4-year school, a public or a private, whether that's an in-state school for you or an out-of-state school for you, these schools are going to be looking for the FAFSA form. So it's something that every family listening is going to want to file. I won't tell you that it's going to be like the most exciting day of your life. You're not going to be doing cartwheels as you're filling it out, but it is not a difficult form. It is very doable, particularly if you have your tax information right there with you as you're filing that form. It really does, you know, tell you this line of your 1040 is going to go into this line of the FAFSA. So it's a very doable form. If that's something that feels pretty intimidating, especially the first time filing that form, we do file FAFSAs in our office. Well, in our office now is really in my living room, but we file them on Zoom. So you can make an appointment with us. It's totally free. Takes about an hour or so for us to file the FAFSA and get that sent to all of the colleges. And then we kind of talk you through it a little bit about what the results look like once we've, you know, we can see those numbers and we kind of tell you what that might mean for you. But we do that in our office. So if that's something that is intimidating and you'd like for somebody to be there with you, certainly you can see the number at the bottom of the screen. Just give us a call. We can set up an appointment anytime. So the FAFSA form, again, is for everyone listening. And sometimes I do get asked, you know, we feel like we might earn too much money, or we might not be eligible for need-based aid. So should we really bother filing the FAFSA, or what's that income cutoff where we should no longer think about filing the FAFSA? I think for every student, at least in the first year, it's a good idea to file that form for a couple of reasons. One of them is that you can't borrow on that federal student loan if you haven't filed a FAFSA form. So if you want your students to have some skin in the game, so to speak, and them to have a portion of that money, in their name, this is the way to do it. Any federal loans are going to be much better in terms of in terms of the interest rates and terms for the student than any private student loans that you could get. So that's one reason. The other reason is there are some scholarship programs that do require students to have filed a FAFSA. Here in New Hampshire, one of them is New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, which really is an amazing scholarship program. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but you have to have filed the FAFSA form to apply. So it's worth going through the process. If you find that once your student's been admitted to school and they're receiving only merit-based aid, and they don't have to file the FAFSA in order to receive that merit-based aid at the school, then you might not have to do that in years to come. But I think at least in that student's freshman year, it's a good idea. The other form that you see up there is the CSS Profile form. This is for some of the families listening. So everybody files FAFSA, but some of you are going to file CSS Profile in addition to the FAFSA for some of the schools. The CSS Profile is a form that some of the private colleges use as a secondary form to gather additional financial information from a family. Typically, these colleges are some of the more competitive private colleges out there. In New Hampshire, the only schools using that form are going to be Dartmouth and St. Anselm College, for example. But as we go south into Massachusetts, you're going to see that there are many more schools, BU and BC and Northeastern and Bentley and those types of schools are going to all be looking for CSS Profile in addition to the FAFSA form. We are going to talk about both of these forms tonight and what they look like, but the really important thing to understand is that they do have deadlines. Just like the college admission deadlines, college financial aid deadlines are different from school to school. So there's no consistency and no magic, you must have these done by this date. Both of them do become available October 1st of the student's senior year. So you can start filing as of October 1. Anything you file before that is going to be the previous year's form. So you don't want to get started early in this process, but you can start October 1. And depending upon your school, those deadlines could be very different. So if you are sitting at a football game, should we be able to do that in the fall? And one of your friends is talking about, having filed the FAFSA or the CSS Profile, and now you're panicking because you're worried that you've missed the dates. It could be that that student's schools are very different in what their deadlines are than your student's schools, or a student applying earlier in the process, like an early action or an early decision student, is going to have earlier financial aid deadlines than a student applying regular decision. So the real deadline that you want to look at is the deadline from your specific schools for your specific type of application, and those are what you want to go by. Keep some kind of a calendar, whether that's, in your phones or whether it's like a physical calendar on your refrigerator so everybody has to look at it, just so you can keep track of all these deadlines in the student's senior year, because this is my job. I've done this kind of stuff for, way too many years, almost 30 years probably now. And when my own child was going through it, it's hard to keep track of all of this. So I get it. Find a good way that makes sense for your family and keep track of all of those deadlines, admissions and financial aid, for sure.
And Tilton has this lovely database. It's called SCORE. I don't know if you've
SCORE,
ever heard me mention it before. I'm looking at all my student faces. So the best part about SCORE, and for families too, is that all of your deadlines will be tracked in SCORE.
Awesome.
So when I tell you, figuring out a tool to use, SCORE is the perfect one.
That's really great, because it probably also prompts them as it gets closer to deadlines and will help you with that. That's a really great way to do it. Can you also see their SCORE information as they're like adding schools and stuff like that? That's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And SCORE also has a great net price calculator too. It's not specific for colleges, but it can be pretty helpful.
But it'll help.
Yeah, for the parents online, we cannot see your net price calculator or the information that you put in.
Yeah, Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of them, they don't even like save your information. You have to like create an
Right.
account for those to save your information. So it is, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the FAFSA first, particularly because, and a little bit more in depth because everybody will be filing that form. And then I'm going to flip over and talk a little bit about CSS Profile. But this FAFSA form, the real goal is to gather your financial information, and the same information is gathered from every single family. And there's this magic formula behind the scenes that we don't see, but I've done some of these hand calculations to know what it looks like. But the result of putting those numbers through the magic formula is what's called an expected family contribution. And that EFC is essentially the amount of money that, based on that information, the federal government has determined that your family can contribute towards the college education for that upcoming year. So it's a year-by-year thing. You do file a FAFSA every single year that the student is going to be an undergraduate student. So for all 4 of your years, you'll file 4 separate FAFSAs. It does become easier. They keep the information after the first year. So it's just a renewal after that first year. But you do file every single year, and that EFC could or couldn't change depending on your family's circumstances. But that number is what the colleges use to put together your financial aid award, and I'm going to show you how they do that. I will tell you that you're not likely to necessarily agree with that expected family contribution being what your family can afford to contribute to a student's education for that upcoming year. It does take into consideration student borrowing and parent borrowing and some of our savings going into this and some of our current income. So it's typically a higher number than what we're hoping it might be, but just know that that is out there. And for those of you who have students who are a little bit younger in the process, this is something that you can calculate. There are EFC calculators. We have one on our website that you can use, just so you have a sense of what that is going to look like for your family, because it, as I'm going to show you in a little bit, it's a pretty important number as you go forward. So FAFSA's filed online. Used to be back in the olden days when I was a school counselor, we would get boxes of them in our office and we'd be able to physically hand those to families and they could fill them out on paper and you sent them back in to be processed. That can still happen, but it's not the way that most families are going to be doing that. You're going to go to studentaid.gov, which is actually going to be a pretty important website for you, because not only is this where FAFSA is, but it's where all of your student loan information will be housed as you go through that process. And if parents borrow on the parent loan, that information is going to be on studentaid.gov as well. But the FAFSA site kind of looks like this, or it does look like this when you get in there. For those of you starting a new FAFSA, you're just going to click log in, and then you're going to be able to get started on your FAFSA. There is a Twitter account where you can talk with some of the FAFSA experts and get some information about questions you might have as you're filing that. You can also call their 1-800 number, and you can also call us. We take FAFSA questions all day long. We have one of us that's dedicated to the phones each and every day. We rotate through all of us, and we answer those phones and those questions that are coming in. So if you happen to be filing and you have a question, certainly give us a call. And again, if you want to file with one of our counselors, you can certainly give us a call and we can walk you through the whole process. So just to give you an idea of what that's going to be looking like. So one of the pieces of the FAFSA is, because we don't have the physical paper anymore, we don't physically sign the FAFSA form. So you're going to electronically sign the FAFSA, and you're going to do that using what's called an FSA ID. So the student has to file the FAFSA, so the student has to have an FSA ID, and then one of the parents has to have an FSA ID. Parents, if you already have an FSA ID for an older child, just use that same one. For this student heading off to college as well, if you haven't created one, you'll need to create one for this student. But each student has to have a unique FSA ID. So if you have multiple students in college at the same time, they each have to have their unique FSA ID, because that's going to correlate to their own FAFSA form then. What it really is it's a combination of a username and a password. And again, that's how you get into the FAFSA. That's how you sign your master promissory note if you decide to borrow on the student loans. It's how a parent can take out the Parent Plus loan. So they are pretty important. It's pretty important information to have as you go through the process. You can do this live. So if you're starting your FAFSA form, you can create your FSA ID right there and then, and it's going to be ready to use, and you can sign your FAFSA form that same day, or you can do it ahead of time. That it really doesn't matter. Either way is just fine. It doesn't take very long to do it, but it's, you know, it's something that you're going to need to do as you go through the process. One thing I will tell you about that is there's a step in there that asks you to verify your mobile phone number and your email address. I would verify both. And the way that you do that is they send you a code to your phone, and then they send you a code to your email, and you put that code in, and then it's verified. I would do that because that's the way that you can retrieve your username and password that next year when you've forgotten. Notice I said when, because although we tell us to keep them in a nice, safe place, inevitably we're going to lose that safe place, and at one point in those 4 years that our student is an undergrad. But it's super easy to retrieve with your phone or with your email address. So one of the things you can get started on early in the process. The other really cool tool that is relatively new, it's probably about 5 years old, is the IRS Data Retrieval tool. This is a way for families to, while they're in the FAFSA form, you click a little hyperlink and it takes you out to the IRS website. You connect with your tax forms for that particular year, and it pulls those that tax information right back into the FAFSA form. So it's a really great way to make sure that all of the information is correct, because you're pulling it already from your already submitted tax returns with the IRS. But it's also a really great way for you to verify that information for the colleges. Again, because you already have filed these taxes, they've already been accepted by the IRS, they're verified, and by using this IRS data retrieval tool to pull them onto the FAFSA form, you're telling the colleges that that information is verified, and you're less likely to have to verify information at a later point in the financial process. So it's a pretty simple process. When it works super easy. There are moments when it's touchy and you might have to go back in and try it again. But the trick is that when you go out to that IRS website, make sure that you're using, first of all, that your name appears correctly on the form that comes up at the IRS site. And also then you have to type in your mailing address. Make sure it's exactly as it is on your tax forms, because if you live at 101 Main Street and you type in 101 Main STREET, but on your tax forms you put ST, it's not going to match, and it's not going to pull the information in. So it's super touchy, but as long as everything matches, it's really great, and it will pull everything into your form. You can also use this for your students. So if your student filed taxes in that particular tax year, they can use it as well to pull their information right over. There are a couple of instances where you can't use it. So if you're a married couple but you file your taxes separately, you can't pull twice in, so you're going to have to actually physically combine those taxes or that tax information and put that onto the FAFSA, type that in by hand. And again, this is where we could come in. So a lot of families are nervous about doing that. We do it all the time. So you can certainly give us a call for us to help you out with that. And if you've had a change in marital status, so if you got married since you filed those taxes, or if you've been separated or divorced since you filed those taxes, then you don't want to use that data retrieval tool. We want to separate that information out so that we file that form properly for you as you go forward. And again, that's something that we can help with. So when we are on the phones and when we're working with families, there are a couple things that we see more often coming through, more frequently asked questions or things that are holding up the FAFSA form. And we want to share that with you so that hopefully you can avoid some of those types of things. The first thing that we get all the time is a parent calling us and saying, I'm not able to get into my son or daughter's FAFSA form. I'm trying to at a college, or I'm trying to update some tax information. And we say, so which FSA ID are you using? And they say that they're using their own. The problem with that is now you're trying to get into your own FAFSA, so to speak, because that's your FSA ID. It is the student's FAFSA, although most of the time it is the parents filing the form. It is the student's FAFSA. So everything that you're seeing on that form as you or your is referring to the student. So you want to make sure that you're using the student's FSA ID to get in there and to sign the form as the student. The other thing that you have to be careful about as a parent is, you know, if you're putting in social security number or you're answering marital status, that remember you're answering that for your student first. There is a parent section, but in the student section, that is their information so that you don't end up with the wrong status and end up with the wrong financial aid award based on putting your information instead of the student's. So make sure you know it's the student's FAFSA. The deadline to complete the FAFSA, as I was saying earlier, it's really the college's deadline. You'll notice that on the FAFSA form, it says that, you know, you can file this form through the end of June of the student's senior year. We don't want to wait till June of the student's senior year because by then you'll have missed out on the financial aid that's being offered by the school itself. So the deadline is really the school's deadline. So always pay attention to that. Search out each website and write that down so you know what you're up to. Independent student status. This is something that we do get quite a few questions about. An independent student does not need to include their parent information on the FAFSA form. A dependent student does. So obviously that makes a difference financially in terms of what that expected family contribution is going to look like. But independent student is not as simple as a student being 18 years old or going to live with grandma. Those things are not necessarily going to make a student independent. So there's going to be a series of questions on the FAFSA that you'll answer as you go into that form, and those are the dependency questions. So if you can answer yes to any of the questions, then your student would be considered independent. And they're going to ask you things like, is the student 24 or older? Because if they're 24 or older, they're independent. Students are automatically independent if they're graduate students. So even if they're not 24, some of our students may continue directly and do their master's program right after their undergrad. And at that point, they might be 21 or 22, but they will be considered independent at that point in time because they're graduate students. If a student is in the military or a veteran of the military, they would be independent. If they're married or they have a child that they support financially, they would be considered independent. If a student is an emancipated minor, they would be considered independent. If a student is a ward of the state, so both of their parents are deceased, or if they have been in foster care at any point after the age of 13, they would be considered independent. If a student is in a legal guardianship, so a situation where anyone besides the parent is the legal guardian, then that student is also going to be independent and they would file a FAFSA by themselves. If a student is, what am I forgetting? Graduate student, military. If a student is considered homeless, they would also be considered independent in this process. But if you answer no, 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 no to all of those questions, then the next question is, will you include your parents' information, or you need to include your parents' information, basically. So that's what independent students would look like on the FAFSA form. Parents on the FAFSA form, so there's a couple different circumstances that might switch who's on the FAFSA form. So two married parents living together, they're going to be on the FAFSA form. If there's been a divorce in a household, then the parent on the FAFSA form is going to be the parent with whom that child resides 51% or more of the time. So that custodial parent becomes the parent on the FAFSA. That non-custodial parent does not show up on the FAFSA at all. If that custodial parent is remarried, though, that step parent does get included on the FAFSA. So it's a household that they are capturing on the FAFSA form. I'm trying to think other circumstances. But usually what happens is, you know, their parents are unsure whether to include the step parent. But yes, that step parent does get included on the form if they are in the custodial parent's home. So that's how FAFSA works. CSS Profile is just a little bit different. They still would file the form with the custodial parent and a step parent if there is one. But the non-custodial parent will also file their own CSS Profile form for most colleges. It's called a non-custodial parent form, and then that parent files that particular form, and if that parent is remarried, that step parent's information also goes on the form, so potentially 4 parents on CSS Profile, and all of that information is put together in the financial aid office. So FAFSA, just the custodial parent, CSS Profile, potentially both custodial and non-custodial. And if a family has more than one child in college, you definitely need to file 2 FAFSAs and or 2 CSS profile forms, depending on the schools. But what happens is that expected family contribution is not really doubling for the family, because now you can't be expected to contribute that same amount that you contributed for the first child, you know, in that first year, for now having for that second child. So if your EFC was $20,000 to begin with, you're now not going to be expected to contribute $20,000 for each of those students. You're still going to look at that 20, but it's going to get divided between the 2 students in college. So potentially, each of those students becomes more eligible for aid at their own individual colleges, and they may receive more need-based aid at the school itself. So that's something that you want to make sure that on the FAFSA there is a question asking, is there, you know, how many members of the household, students, young children in the household are going to be in college at the same time. So make sure you get that number in there so that they are dividing that EFC out. And then the last question that we see a lot is, which year's tax returns do we use? So on the FAFSA, if your student is a senior this year and you're filing this form now, you're going to use 2019 tax information. So it's kind of prior year is how they talk about it. So prior year to when you're going to get started in that process. So for this year seniors, it's 2019. So next year seniors will use 2020. But the question usually is but what if 2019 is not a really good indicator of what our finances look like now, especially now during COVID, where a lot of families, you know, a lot of parents may have been furloughed, or there may have been a sick member of the family and you might not have worked as much that particular year. Can we use 2020 to file the FAFSA form instead? The short answer is we can't. It is a federal form and they're pretty strict about, you know, following what year information you use. So you would still use 2019, but then you would want to let the colleges know that there is a change in finances, and whether that has to do with COVID or whether it just has to do with any, you know, reason, you're going to want to let the colleges know why things are different. And the way to do that is by using what's called a special circumstances form. Most colleges have this form available on their website, on the financial aid webpage. You'll see this form and families can fill that out. And essentially you're kind of appealing your financial aid that you might receive from that college. So you're saying, although 2019 looked like this, 2020 is going to look like that, or 2021 is going to look like that. Or maybe there's other circumstances, things like there could be high unreimbursed medical expenses, for example, that the family is working to pay off. Those are things that you can use in a special circumstances form to appeal financial aid. So these are things that you want to make sure that you're doing with each and every college. So unfortunately, that one form for one school is not necessarily going to all of the schools, so that is a little tricky with FAFSA. On the CSS profile, there is a place for you to type in special circumstances. So for your CSS schools, you can type it once and it is getting sent to all of those schools. But for your strictly FAFSA schools, you're going to have to, you know, contact each school, let them know what those circumstances are, and then wait for that appeal process to go through. I think it's important to understand that you want to have realistic expectations of what that's going to look like. You know, sometimes I'm talking with a family and, you know, things have changed a little bit in the family in terms of employment, or, you know, one parent lost a job or whatever it may be. And they're hoping that this student is going to get, you know, $25,000 more in financial, you know, need-based financial aid. That is generally not going to happen. It would take a big shift in expected family contribution to make something like that happen. But understanding that a college may be able to, you know, come up with a couple more $1,000s would be more realistic in that sense. So just being realistic, talking with these financial aid offices is really going to go a long way. You can see some of the things that may and may not qualify up there on the screen, but just to give you some sense of what a special circumstance might look like as you go forward. And any questions about that, you know, certainly ask, get in touch with us, or get in touch with your college counselors, get in touch with the schools themselves as well. So on the FAFSA, what are we reporting as income? So the things that FAFSA is going to consider as part of your income are obviously our wages are going to be part of that. If there's any rental income that you have coming in, that's going to be considered income. And then any interest and ordinary dividends, because those are things that are in that adjusted gross income on your tax form. So that is going to be considered income on the FAFSA form. If you have cashed in pensions, annuities, or IRAs, those are also going to show up as income on the FAFSA form. And then there is a spot where you're going to include child support that you receive for all the children in the family. That is going to count as income in the formula for financial aid. So those are the basics of income. The majority of what the formula is looking like is really coming from income. It's a very income-driven form. So anywhere from 22 to 47% of your income is being considered for that form. And it really depends on what your income level is, how many are in your household, how close you are to retirement age. A bunch of factors go into that, but it's somewhere between 22 and 47%. For our students, they do have a little bit of income protection, so they can earn up to about $6,500 or so without that really counting as part of the formula. But anything they earn above that is going to be about 50% available for that formula. So students' income would also be considered as part of that process. They have their own section that they complete on the FAFSA about their income and assets. So speaking of assets, what are assets on the FAFSA form? So assets are not as heavily considered on the FAFSA form as they are on the CSS Profile form. CSS Profile is an asset-driven form, so that one is going to capture more. But on the FAFSA form, parents are going to have a question that pops up and it says, do you have assets of more than this amount of money? And it might be $6,000 or $8,000. And that is based entirely on your age. So the closer you are to retirement, the larger that number becomes. So the more protected your assets become. If you do not have more money in assets than that amount on the FAFSA form, you click no and you don't answer any questions about your assets. You move on to your students' income and assets. If you do have more than that, you're going to answer 3 questions are going to pop up. So the first question says, as of today, what do you have in cash, savings, and checking? So you're going to total up your bank accounts and you're going to put that number onto line 1. The second question is, what are your investments? And by investments, they're looking for things like stocks and bonds and mutual funds, CDs or money market accounts, 529 plans that you have for all of your children. If you have a second property, the equity in that second property would count, but not your primary residence. So here is not where we're reporting anything about our primary home. Here is not where we're reporting anything about retirement funds. So we're not including those as assets on the FAFSA form. CSS Profile will capture both of those things, but FAFSA does not. And then for students, they're going to include these things as well if they have them, but they're also going to include their UTMA and UGMA accounts. So those are the uniform gift to minor accounts that we might have set up when our children were little because they couldn't deposit money, but we could in their names. So, those are the ones that we have both of our names on. So those are actually a child's asset. You're going to answer those 3 questions. Again, we have that asset protection built in. So if it told you you had asset protection allowance of $7,000, that's kind of subtracted from the total of your assets. Anything you have above that amount is going to be considered for the formula, but at most at 5.64%. Okay, so that's in parents' names. So really our assets are not nearly as considered as our income. For our students, though, anything that they have in their name is considered for the formula. There is no protection allowance, and it is considered for the formula at 20%. So anything in their name, 20% of that is going into that expected family contribution. So you want to make sure that you have all of these things. Again, something that we can help you with. We do get a lot of phone calls saying, should I include this thing? I'm not sure if it's my asset or not. Definitely you can give us a call with those types of questions as they come through. Any questions about FAFSA form before we go forward? Doing okay?
It doesn't seem like we have any questions in the chat. I did tell everyone that we would end at 9:30 tonight, so I just want to be respectful of people's time and hopefully have a few minutes.
We got it. We got it. Perfect.
Thanks,
All right.
Karen.
So no problem. So quickly, CSS Profile. This is a form that does cost money. When you file this form, you're going to go to the College Board website. It is $25 to register and to pay for the first school, and then it's $16 per school after that. Remember, this form is not one you're going to file unless you have to. So if your colleges are requiring it, you're going to file the form. If they're not, you don't need to file this form. This one is about 300 questions, whereas FAFSA is about 100 questions. So again, it is a lengthier form. This is not one that we file in our office just because of time. We don't have the resources to do that, but we can certainly answer questions that you might have. It's very similar. It's going to ask you some similar questions. So hang on to your FAFSA once you've filed it, because you can kind of use that same information, but it is going to gather information about your primary home. It is going to gather information about your retirement funds. So those things are included on CSS. That's the major difference between the two forms. So the colleges are going to use this information that you're providing to them to put together a financial aid award for the student. They may need to verify some of those numbers, and they may call on you to use that IRS Data Retrieval tool or to send them a tax transcript. But not every student is selected for verification. If you've already used data retrieval, you likely are not going to be selected for that. And then the college will create a financial aid award and send that either through the mail to the student, or it could potentially be in the student's portal. So students, when you get that congratulations letter from your different colleges, read past the word congratulations, because I know that's like the temptation, is to read congratulations and then celebrate and not read the rest of that letter. But somewhere down on the bottom of that letter, they might ask you to set up a student portal, and they'll give you your username and a temporary password to do that. And that's then where they're going to communicate with you, and likely where they're going to send your financial aid award. So just to be aware of that could potentially come through a student portal. And parents, students have access to that. We don't have access to that as parents. So you might want to just keep asking, hey, have you seen that yet? Has that come in yet? So make sure that you get that financial aid award. We talked about what's going to be as part of these awards. Calculating financial need, this is where EFC comes in. So the college takes their total cost of attendance, so that's tuition, room and board, fees, books, travel. They kind of throw everything at that cost of attendance, and they subtract your EFC right from the top, because they say, hey, guess what? Your family can afford that. We're going to try to come up with the rest, which is a demonstrated financial need. And what they're going to do is put together a financial aid award. So let's say this is a small private school, cost of attendance is $55,000. Family's EFC is $15,000. So this school has determined the student is eligible for $40,000 worth of aid. You can see they put together a financial aid award for the student, including a scholarship based on merit, including a grant based on need. The student loan, you can see that $3,500 in subsidized, meaning that there's no interest accruing on that portion of the loan. An unsubsidized Stafford loan, which means there is interest accruing on that portion of the loan. So that's a $5,500 loan, and then some work study. The problem is this student was eligible for $40,000, and they only really received $25,500. So now that family owes that $14,500 in gap money. But remember, we also pay the expected family contribution and work study up front, because a student has to go there and earn that. So really, this family is going to owe the college $32,000, which is really $37,500 in the end, because of that student loan that the student will pay back. Is this somewhat typical? It really is somewhat typical in what we're seeing or it is typical in what we're seeing with financial aid awards. However, the one line that you as families can really affect is that presidential scholarship line. So remember earlier I said colleges have their own sums of money that they're able to offer to students, and some have more money that they're able to offer. This particular school, their top scholarship was 10 grand, but another school could be $25,000 or $30,000. So that is going to get your student a lot closer to that gap that you're not covered. So applying wisely, applying to only reach colleges is not going to get the student the top scholarship, because if you are not the top candidate, it's a reach school for you. There are top candidates, and they are going to get that top money. So you might get a little, or you might get none from those reach schools. So just being very cognizant about how you're putting your list together will make this equation come out a little bit better come April of your student's senior year. So, any questions you guys have about that, certainly pose those to us as we get along. There are many options for funding this once we get that bill from the colleges. Certainly, taking money out of our current income and our savings is one way to avoid financing some of that education, but likely we're not necessarily going to be able to do all of that. You can make tuition payment plans, or can be involved in a tuition payment plan where you pay a little bit per month instead of one lump sum in July and then one lump sum in December for the second semester. That really helps a little bit. Parents can borrow on what's called a Parent Plus loan. You can see the interest rate and the large origination fee up there on the screen. It is kind of our equivalent to that student loan, although we have a much larger fee than our students do at 1%. It is very easy to apply for, but it is something that we want to be aware of, that origination fee. Some families turn to private student loans instead, and this is a situation where we as parents are going to end up co-signing because our students don't have that income to get those private student loans just yet, but it would be then in our student's name and us as co-signers. So there's lots of alternatives. I will tell you, you'll probably do it differently every year that your student is an undergrad. We have appointments where we work with families. Once they get their awards from the colleges, we can sit down and kind of help you make a plan and understand what those payments would look like in each scenario. So you can give us a call for those as well.
Please,
and then the final thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Please think very carefully before you take out private loans.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the FAFSA and federal aid is pushed so hard right now.
Yeah. Lots of forgiveness programs with right now, the federal loans are all in forbearance. So meaning that there are no payments required from students who have borrowed on federal loans. However, private student loans, students are paying right now during this process. So, private student loans don't usually get forgiven in any way, shape, or form, whereas the federal loans can. So yeah, if you can borrow
federally, have very crazy interest rates.
Yeah.
And there was one quick question I just want to make sure it gets answered. Sure. It says, what if you're using an IRA to fund college?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly do that. There's no restrictions on what you can do or what you can't do. It's one of those things that they tell you not necessarily to borrow for your own retirement. I mean, I'm not a financial planner by any means, believe me, and you need to do what you do. But we can borrow for college, whereas we can't borrow for our retirement. So that's one of those things that listening to financial planners has always stuck with me. But you can do it. I mean, it's not something that you can't do as you go through it. A lot of families will borrow on like their 401k or something where they are paying themselves back that loan. They might take a loan from a 401k and pay themselves back, so that it feels a little bit better that way. You can also do a home equity loan or line of credit. So scholarships, we want students to be looking at scholarships, but those national scholarships, so many students are applying for. If we have a really ambitious student and we have somebody who's gonna, put in that work, those are going to be won by somebody. So I'd rather have them won by you than anybody else. So definitely put some time into that and create profiles and get lists of potential scholarships. But where I'd rather that you spend some time is to really look at SCORE, to really look with your college counselors and ask them what's available locally. For some of you who do not live in the Tilton area, you might also want to check with your home school. So whatever your town school is, that your public school is, you may be eligible for some of those scholarships as well. So you can certainly check with that with the town. And you can also check with your state. So if you don't happen to be a New Hampshire resident, you can check with your particular state to see if there's anything out there. New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, for those of you who do live in New Hampshire, it's a great organization in Concord. They have about 200 different scholarships each year that they offer to students, about $6 million that is awarded. Students can go online starting February 1 and apply with one application. You don't have to select which of those those scholarships you're applying to. And it is a little bit lengthy. It is a lengthy scholarship to apply to, and there is an essay. So some students are like, oh my gosh, I'm so done with this process at that point in time. But 1 in 5 students last year received aid, and the average award was like $3,700. So if they're going to put some efforts into something, this is one that might be a good effort. The best effort, though, is going to be locally, you know, at your school. So take a peek at that. All right. So I'm trying to get it wrapped up all into a nice bow, almost by 9:30, right? 9:32. 9:32. All right. So are there any questions that I can answer, or maybe the counselors can answer for anybody?
Thank you very much, Karen.
Yeah, you're so welcome. See if anybody had any questions.
I had a question.
Sure.
If you have a student that is deferring and maybe doing courses during the, during the years that he's deferring or the year, are these awards looked at differently every year? Like if he's doing, say, a transfer track?
Yeah.
And then you go
Yeah,
into
so that's a couple different things there, David, actually. So one of the pieces is that if a student is deferring, oftentimes they can take a certain number of other college courses before they arrive on that campus that they've deferred from. They take more than that, they're going to be considered a transfer student, and their aid will definitely change. Transfer students, there's not as much merit scholarship typically for transfer students as there is for incoming freshmen. So it could reduce the aid. So look at the restrictions from that particular school. You know, some schools say you can't take any outside college courses if you're deferring. So definitely talk with the college counselors, because they might have some better sense of the particular schools that your student is looking for. But that is a big caution, especially this year, you know, with COVID. That was one of the things that, you know, a lot of students were looking to defer, and their plans, you know, they had to adjust their plans depending on which schools they were looking at. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll stay on, Karen, if that's okay with
Yeah, absolutely.
A few questions. But if you don't have any questions, please feel free to log off, and thanks again for being here.
Absolutely. I'm going to just stop my sharing there so that you don't have to look at my screen forever.
Excellent. I mean, with the families finally just on the line, do you folks have any questions that you want to ask?